Hare Krishna. So we'd like to welcome here with us His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Maharaj. Hari! They already did that. Three times. So, of course, most of you will have heard and know about Krishna Kshetra Maharaj. Maharaj is a direct disciple of our founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada. He's also a sannyasi, like a traveling senior monk, and also an initiating spiritual master. And originally coming from America in the early 70s, as a young man, he traveled in Europe and in Germany, actually, then came in contact. I mean, he already knew the devotees from the university there in America, but he joined the movement in Germany, in Heidelberg and then Düsseldorf. And Maharaj met Srila Prabhupada 3 weeks later in Paris in 72 and received initiation from Srila Prabhupada in Paris. And then as a young monk, served as a priest, as a missionary. Many of you are familiar with Simhachalam in Germany. Maharaj was there at the installation of Lord Nishingadev 40 years ago, and also was one of the first priests there for Lord Nishingadev. And Maharaj also on our journey when we came to Zurich explained how when this building was purchased in 1980, Maharaj was here with Harikesh and Guru Garam at that time looking at the building. So there is a connection also to Zurich for a long time. And Maharaj also served for 10 years as the global minister for the deity ministry, like, yes, 10 years, I think so. And also then after that, Maharaj resumed his original study and received in 2004 a PhD from the University of Oxford. And now he's also sharing Krishna consciousness in the academic field. He's a research fellow at the Oxford University Center for Hindu Studies. Also Maharaj taught and lived in Hong Kong, teacher at the University of Hong Kong, and is also author of several books. And several books, yeah. I didn't wrote down all the titles, but if you can check on the webpage, if you Google Krishna Kshetra Maharaj, you find Maharaj's webpage and several books Maharaj wrote. And of course, Maharaj has been practicing Krishna consciousness, the art of Bhakti Yoga, as we practice it here at the temple for 50 years. So we are very, very grateful and happy that Maharaj is with us and sharing his wisdom. And today's talk will be on the pursuit of happiness. And I think we're all looking for happiness, so we're looking forward to learn from Maharaj how to become happy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Kind words and warm welcomes. I want to mention one other connection I have with Zurich, and that is Chota Jagannath Subhadra Baladev. I first saw them in the end of June, it must have been 1972. Not here in Zurich, they were in Hamburg. So I had just joined the temple in Heidelberg, Stuttgart, not Düsseldorf. We went to Hamburg on our way to Paris, and in Hamburg they had a beautiful little temple in a warehouse, and Chota Jagannath and Subhadra and Baladev. So it's special for me to see them here, smiling. Yeah, inspired by the small ones. Yes. And is it still there? I saw this morning, I hope it's still there, I saw that Big Subhadra has a purse. Did you know that? Later you can go up and look. first time I've seen somebody with a purse. Okay, let's chant some Mangala Charana, shall we? Those of you who know, you're welcome to join in. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Nimitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadati Swadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yukta Padakamalham Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sarajatam Sahagana Radhanatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lamita Shri Vishakhanditam Scha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Kristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Some years ago, let's see, this would have been 2015, I was visiting Beijing, China, and there I was invited to give lectures in a few universities, including Tsinghua University, in which there was a department, a faculty of Marxism studies. Marxism. Most of you will know something about Marxism. So I was invited to speak, and we learned that the professor, a very nice young lady, had written a book on happiness. Her particular interest was in happiness. And so I thought, all right, let me speak something on happiness in this to her students, to bring in the devotional, the Vaishnava perspective, and well, this is the faculty of Marxism. How are they going to take this? Let's see. So I thought, anyway, they've invited me, so let's just go with it. So I thought to share with you that presentation. Much of this, for many of you, will be very basic. But perhaps it will be interesting for you nonetheless to consider how you might talk about this subject. I always like to encourage everyone who is in some way inspired, attracted by this culture of what Srila Prabhupada called Krishna consciousness, to one way to sort of imbibe what we hear is to be thinking, okay, how would I explain this to somebody? How would I explain this to my little sister, or to my older sister, or whoever, a family member, a friend, a colleague? Would there be a way that I could capture them and interest them in what I find interesting? Another very general point is, again, as many of you will know, Srila Prabhupada many times spoke about how we are all pursuing happiness. And he often made this kind of a selling point of Krishna consciousness. You want to be happy, then take to Bhakti Yoga, take to Krishna consciousness. This is how you do it. Of course, there's been a lot of philosophical, psychological discussion, philosophical and psychological discussion, sociological, a lot of research on what is it that we call happiness. I'm not going to go into any sort of depth on that, but this is just touching on some of the basic ideas which are turning our attention from material happiness to spiritual happiness. It's been recognized to be an increasing problem in the world. Maybe this is not a big surprise to you, but depression, according to the World Health Organization, is an increasing problem. I believe they've even said it's the #1 disease. Depression can be a very serious condition. Why is it increasing, we may certainly ask. And we just might, this again, we have to picture I'm in Beijing in a university talking to students of Marxism, so I'm saying maybe there's something to be learned from wisdom traditions. Not something that one hears much about in classes of Marxism, I suppose. And so what I've done in this talk is focused on a particular way of presenting Indian wisdom called a therapeutic mandala. Nowadays, therapy, it's something we kind of relate to a lot in our culture, I believe. So it may be helpful for approaching the whole subject. And I haven't made this up, nor am I taking exclusively from from the traditional texts, but I'm also using some derivative work, in this case, a particular Professor Fields, who wrote a book called Religious Therapeutics. Now, in Chinese universities, one has to be really careful to even use the word religion. In fact, not that year, but 3 years later, I guess, I was warned by the professor. I was invited in another class to speak in Beijing. Please no religion in your lecture, okay? And my subject was the Ramayana, and I thought, right, okay, no religion, Ramayana, good luck. But, you know, Lord Rama was helpful, and he said, don't worry about it, don't talk about religion, just talk about Dharma. And so that's what I did, and there was no problem. Dharma, yeah, Dharma is cool. Okay, so Fields came up with this list of branches of therapeutics, religious therapeutics. You can see them all here: metaphysical and epistemic foundations. Epistemic, it's the latest trendy word in philosophy. If you're not familiar, it means how do you know something. Epistemology is the study of how do we learn something, how to study. Yeah. And then another fancy word, soteriological orientation. Oh, where is this Swami taking us today? Soteriology, the study of what comes after this life, could be one way of putting it, or the theory of liberation. Now, liberation, Marxism, here we already have another problem. That's not in their vocabulary. Value theory and ethics, physical practice, cultivation of consciousness, medicine and healthcare, aesthetics and community. So I'm going to be going through each of these to expand a little, and we'll see where it takes us. But a general remark, a claim is that Indian wisdom traditions prescribe processes, calling for fundamental changes in what? Consciousness. What's that? That's something that Akandadi Prabhu can tell us a lot about, the problem of modern science and their understandings or lack of understanding of what is consciousness. So, individual and collective consciousness, and I want to say that these processes of change of consciousness would have to be the basis for lasting happiness. Now that's all speaking quite abstractly, I know, but you know, that's what we do in the academic world, that's what keeps us getting bread on the table, so to say. All right, so we start now with the first of these 8 principles or branches, and we're talking about therapy, and so we may say we're talking about treatment. What treatment is the doctor going to give us? Well, let's go to some presuppositions first. And here I took some notions from Hannah Arendt. She was a philosopher, 20th century philosopher. She was a student of Martin Heidegger, and she later immigrated to America. She became famous and also infamous for some of the things she wrote, but that's another topic. She was concerned about the notion of labor. Marxism talks a lot about labor, work, what is it, and how should we be thinking about it, or how should we stop thinking about it? So she criticizes Marx's assumption, talking about presuppositions here, that freedom from labor would lead to higher creative forms of activity. So Marx was saying, hey, if we don't have to work so much, then we're going to get creative, and we'll become, we'll become happy and creative, and we'll do wonderful things. And Arendt said, well, look at the reality. The reality is that many people who are working less, what are they doing? They're simply engaging in more consumerism. They're consuming more. Atyahara, it's called in Sanskrit, eating too much or consuming too much. And self-destructive activity. So intoxication, what is that? It's essentially being self-destructive, isn't it? It's toxic. Toxic means poison. So people take intoxicants to poison themselves. Okay, for a moment we can jump into the Bhagavad-Gita, and there we see that Arjuna finds himself in the midst of a dilemma, and he's kind of asking this question, I see no happiness from engaging in war. Even if I win a kingdom like that of heaven. So he's imagining a situation where he wins this war, the Battle of Kurukshetra, and he wins this kingdom, and now he's even extending, what if this kingdom would be, even greater than the whole Earth planet? Says, I'm not going to be happy. So Arjuna's smart. he already knows that happiness doesn't come from material accomplishment. I thought I'd change this, but okay. So then Krishna replies to this, basically the beginning of the second chapter, or many of the verses, starting from verse 12, saying that let's understand who we are first, and then we can understand what is the problem. And he says, we are different from these bodies, and therefore it makes sense what you're saying, that happiness will not come from gaining something in this world. So there's Arjuna, and he's being pulled actually in two directions, because the presupposition is that happiness will come by material gain. Everyone on the battlefield is making that assumption, except him. And Krishna, in effect, is agreeing with him on this point, but, and this is the interesting twist in the Bhagavad-Gita, he's telling Arjuna, still you should fight. What? Okay, the second of these branches is soteriological orientation. Okay, so what's life for? Srila Prabhupada would often put the question this way, what is the purpose of your life? Kind of a simple and yet not so simple question. What's the aim? Sometimes he would use the word aim. What is the aim of your life? Somebody stops you on the street. What's the aim of your life? What? So, as many of you will know, the Indian tradition, very broadly speaking, speaks of 4 aims for human beings. The word artha it's an interesting word. Sanskrit words can mean aim, it can mean purpose, but it can also, it can mean value, and it can also mean meaning. So what's the meaning of a word, of an idea? Purusha means a person, so purushartha, are the aims of human life, and typically these are defined in 4 categories, namely cosmic and social alignment, or dharma, economic security, artha, another meaning of artha, individual and collective desire, kama, and attainment of existential freedom. How do you like those fancy words? Existential freedom. Yeah. Moksha. So, all right. And the idea in a therapeutic context could be to keep all these 4 aims in the proper balance, to get them in the right perspective. When they're not in balance, when there's too much focus on one at the expense of the others, there could be trouble. So there could be, as a result, depression. And that could be individual, it could also be collective. Okay, third branch of this therapeutic process. Value theory and ethics can be made clear. How can they be made clear? Well, leading to practical action in the world, doing something. Ethics, what is ethics? Ethics is there's 2 ways in general one can think of ethics. One is it's about what one ought to do, what one should do, which is a recognition of 2 things. There's the reality of what is, and there's the hoped for reality, which is to be pursued. How to pursue it? One should do this, that, or the other thing. And then more broadly, the question in classical Greek ethics was, what is the good life? What do we do in order to have successful, have a good life? Okay, so, all right. This is just a kind of footnote, but sometimes these Latin terms are used in the West. There's kind of contrast made between the vita contemplativa, how do you like my Latin pronunciation, and the vita activa, the contemplative life and the active life. And sometimes we might feel that there is something of a tension in our own lives. I want to be more contemplative, but alas, I have to pay my bills, and so I have to work, and so on. And then if someone becomes very contemplative, then they're getting harassment from their relatives. What are you doing? You're sitting around all day. No, I'm not sitting, I'm contemplating. Oh, I see. So the television you're watching, that is your contemplation, huh? Further on value theory and ethics, Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, famously promoted a very ancient principle from India, namely ahimsa, and he coined a term which he then coupled with ahimsa, and that was satyagraha, or literally grasping the truth. And he put these in the center of his philosophy and his way of life. Holding firmly to truth was integral to being nonviolent. Nonviolence being the core of his principle of ethics. And he wrote extensively on this, he spoke extensively, and he was arguably effective at times and at other times thoroughly ineffective in communicating his ideas. I found it interesting, parenthetically, that Hannah Arendt emphasizes two things as being essential elements of coherent society, which presumably would be another prerequisite for happiness, and that is promising and forgiving. If there are promises which people keep, promise keeping. Nowadays we don't hold a lot on promises. We have to write everything down. It has to be in the form of a contract. We can't just say, I'm going to do it. We have to put it in writing. There's very little simple verbal promising going on. And forgiving. We have a problem with forgiving, arguably, in our society. Both of these relate very much to the topic of speech, and specifically true speech, which then, in turn, becomes the basis of further therapy toward happiness. And this leads then into, we're going now from the more theoretical to the physical, the practical side. And we all know, I'm sure you have here in Zurich, yoga studios. Some of you maybe are practicing yoga. Asanas, very nice, popular. It's also popular in China. Yeah, they have some very posh yoga studios in China. Posh, fancy. Fancy, expensive. Schickimicki. Schickimicki. Ist das Schweizerdeutsch? Oh, I've never heard it before. Okay. Schickimicki. Two things which are a serious problem, and we're talking about therapy, and what is the therapy for? Well, people are suffering conditions of excess and neglect. Excess and neglect. Too much of one thing and not enough of another. The results of this are general disconnection from the body. Now, at this point, we who are aspiring bhakti yogis, we may say, well, that could be a good thing. Detachment from the body. We're learning we are not this body, so I will neglect the body, and that will be good. Yes? No. It doesn't work that way. That would be artificial, or in many cases, involuntary. The results of this, or also the cause, are so many sorts of addiction. And I think in our Sunday talks here, you probably hear lots of horror stories about addiction, right? That's something we always like to hammer on about the 4 regulative principles, right? And no, not anymore. That's out of it. Oh, I'm in the last century, sorry. This is, you'll notice by now that, broadly speaking, this presentation was a bit impressionistic. It's not a tightly developed argument, but the conditions for this presentation were, I think, calling for this. But physical yoga, I wanted to point out, often makes connections between our physical body and the wider atmosphere, the wider environment. And so it's significant, I want to say, that some of the more classical poses in yoga practice, asanas, have names identifying them with different natural features. There's Tadasanam, which is the mountain pose, and there's Vrikshasana, which is standing like a tree, and there's so many that are forms, so to say, imitating different animals, such as the dog and the snake and the lion, and actually there's many. So connecting to the natural world is a process that can be accomplished intentionally, through which then therapy is accomplished. Some of you may have heard of Equestrian Therapy. People who, especially autistic people, may be given opportunity to relate with horses, and this can be very therapeutic. Hugging cows, right? This is the thing now. You can hug cows. They charge quite a good price for it, which may be also therapeutic, I don't know. If you pay for it, then you're purified, right? Essential to all of the poses, as again many of you will know, is proper breathing, pranayama. And breathing is something which connects us, something we all became extremely conscious of in the last couple of years with the pandemic. Breathing connects us. Oh my God, that's a problem, right? So we're all wearing masks and so on. Anyway, going on, cultivation of consciousness. So from the body then to the mind, there are disciplines of the mind meant to strengthen the focus. The mind being the center of the senses. The body is composed of senses. And as we all know, most of us will be aware from Bhagavad-Gita, the mind can be our friend if we learn to harness it for our purposes. And if we can't learn to harness our minds, the mind becomes our enemy. Okay, I sort of wanted to get back to the idea of labor, because again, I was speaking to card-carrying Marxists. So I said about cultivation of consciousness. In the context of yoga, the essential labor we're talking about here, it's not just for the body, surprise, surprise, but for the care of the world. And this can be surprising for those familiar with the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that the word kaivalya, although it's generally understood means total isolation, can have a different sense. And it's been argued by scholars that it has a positive sense, and indeed it is also hinted in our scriptures, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that it's actually all about bhakti. It's actually about engagement with the world in the modality, which is beyond the modalities of bhakti. And by doing this, then something radical can happen, and that is that one can go beyond dualities of so-called happiness and so-called distress. At this point, I think I completely lost my Marxist audience. They were polite, but I think I lost them at this point. In any case, in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna says, Jitatmana prashantasya paramatma samahita shitoshna sukadukeshu tatamana pamanayahu. One can get over it. One can get over these dualities in such a way that one experiences a connection. Yoga means connection. What sort of a connection? A connection between oneself and the super self, the Param Atma. Okay, moving on. On the basis of well-cultivated consciousness, then there's, going back to the body, there's medical practice, holistic health, rooted in this understanding that there is a body, there is a mind, there is a self. It's not just body and mind. Or it's not just body, it's body, mind, self. And this involves, and again, you'll be familiar with a balancing process. And balancing is, again, something that you don't hear about in Marxism. Well, you could argue that you do, because, okay, hold on, bear with me, a little lesson on Marxism. Another fancy term, dialectical materialism. Hare Krishna, I know he's finished. When is he going to be finished? I don't want to hear more of this. So, what does dialectical mean? It means there's a thesis and there's an antithesis. It goes back to our good old friend Hegel, which Marx then turned upside down and made into, instead of idealism, he made it materialism. He argued that everything starts with matter, and material conditions, he said, are the basis of our consciousness. It's not that we change our consciousness and then that will determine our well-being. No, we have to adjust our material conditions, and from that we can hope for well-being, for happiness. That's okay, it's a little oversimplified, but it's Sunday lecture simplified in a nutshell, dialectical materialism. My point is that dialectical means here's an idea, here's another idea, or rather, here's a condition, here's an opposing condition. What's going to happen between them? There will be some conflict, but out of the conflict there's going to come some result, and that result is a kind of solution, which is going to lead to another position, an anti-position, and they will then compete. So one could say that the notion of balancing is also found in Marxism, but it's dialectical materialism. It's based on this. It'd be an interesting thing to examine, because balancing of the modalities, the gunas are all about matter. Okay, we won't go there now. What we can, I think, understand in a simple way is balancing of taste. Taste? Yes. A good meal has 6 types of tastes in it. Did you know that? Yes, our Pujari knows. Let's see if we can go through them. There's salty, there's sour, there's sweet, there's bitter, astringent, there's one more. Hot, that's right, thank you. Hot. Okay, we got 6. So a good Sunday feast, has all 6 of these tastes. Balanced eating can be very satisfying. The rasa that we experience can be very pleasing. And this leads us into the 7th of these 8 themes of therapeutics, religious therapeutics. Holistic healthcare is enriched and deepened through attention to aesthetic taste. As I said, my Marxist friends in Beijing were completely lost by now, but they bore with me. Dramatic performance. This is something I'm sometimes, in my madder moments, I'm thinking of proposing to the GBC of ISKCON that they should have a ministry of drama. They might respond, we have enough drama, thank you. But if we had a minister of drama, I think it would be nice. We could have more of this cultural dimension of our tradition that could be very, very relishable and very therapeutic. Imagine, every Sunday feast program we have a little drama. Be nice? No? Maybe. Some of you who visit, you can organize. Yes? Why not? Could be good. All right. Back to Hannah Arendt, she mentions, and this was very striking to me, that storytelling is an essential element of the vita activa. She spoke of 3 things. There's labor, there's work, and there's action in her analysis of the human condition. Labor is something you do just to survive. Work is something you do to preserve, to build a house, and so on. And to act, that's when you start to become actually human. And acting takes place mostly in the public square where people speak with each other, where they communicate. All right. Thank you, Hannah Arendt. I thought it was Hannah Arendt. Community, finally, all of what we've talked about before fosters community. And community is helpfully, I think, contrasted with society, where society has become mass society. And when we have mass society, what do we have? What we often call impersonalism. The feeling of being just a number, just a statistic. So we don't want society, we want community. But community seems so elusive. The ideal community in Indian tradition is the small village. Again, I was talking about this in one of the largest cities of the world, Beijing. They have over 100 cities. Over 100 cities in China have 1 million population or more. 100 cities. All right. Well, as far as community goes, I called attention to these people of an effort by Gandhi to establish hermitages, ashramas. Actually, I say 3. I believe he established 4. One didn't last very long, but especially there's the Sabarmati ashram. If you ever go to Ahmedabad, you can visit. It's become kind of like a museum. You can see where his ashram was. That's another story. His efforts were not overwhelmingly successful, but his attempt was there, his vision was there. And I believe that our Srila Prabhupada was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi with respect to the establishment of communities of ashramas, country ashramas, farms. And so I concluded, from the relative happiness, sukha in Sanskrit, which is always only an aspect of the happiness-distress duality, to ananda. This is the only platform of happiness that properly affirms human dignity. That was my claim. It is happiness that is inclusive and expanding. Anandam buddhivardhanam pratipadam purnam rita svadanam sarvatma snapanam param vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. I didn't mention that in the class. To pursue this kind of quality happiness, I said, is not a luxury. It's a necessity, closely related to achieving success in making a meaningful response to the world's climate change crisis. Well, yes, I ended with this verse. Rajya vidya rajya guhyam pavitram idam uttamam pratyakshadamam dharmyam susukam kartam avyayam. This is the king of knowledge. The king of secrets, pure, ultimate, righteous, directly comprehensible. It is everlasting and joyfully performed. At the end of my talk, the professor got up. This seemed to be the way they do things in China. After the visiting scholar speaks, the professor gets up and corrects what they've said. Yeah, I had this sometime before this. I was invited to speak at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, which is a highly exclusive place. You have to be a member of the Communist Party in order to teach there and to do research. And I was invited to give a talk on Vedanta. So I gave a talk on Vedanta, on Vaishnava Vedanta. And at the end of my little talk, the professor, who was very polite, he then proceeded to speak on how actually Vedanta is Advaita. The real Vedanta is Advaita Vedanta. Hare Krishna. What is the point? He was speaking in Mandarin, so someone was translating back to me what he was saying, and I just thought, okay, is that how it works here? So anyway, this professor, she was also very polite and very nice, and she just said, well, we follow Marx, and for Marx, all of this doesn't make any sense. Essentially, that's what she said. Yes. Like, wait a minute. I thought we were supposed to use intellectual process of argumentation and reasoning and analysis. No, apparently it was more a matter of ideology. I think they give me an honorarium. Okay, that was my little talk on happiness. And how did I call it? Yes, classical and modern Indian perspectives on the pursuit of happiness. Hare Krishna. So, I made it on time. I guess we have 3 minutes.
If a little more time.
Can be more time. If there's any reflections, questions, yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. It was very interesting. I just got so curious. How come they invite you in this Marxist university?
Yeah. I started to wonder that myself. It's. I think a lot of it is they get something. They get some kudos for inviting a foreign professor to speak, and especially if he's from Oxford. I heard this countless times when I was teaching at Chinese University in Hong Kong for altogether 6 semesters over a 5-year period, and
teaching what? Teaching what?
I was teaching in the Department of Cultural and Religious Studies, and I was teaching courses on Indian culture and religion for undergraduates, so it was all very introductory. But I was given a lot of freedom to create my own courses, and it was interesting, it was fun. But so many times I heard it from especially one of my colleagues, professors, saying, "You're from Oxford, this is so good, just that you're, for me, yeah, it didn't matter who I was or what I said or anything. Oh, he's from Oxford, it's okay." I could say also, it's been now since 2019, I haven't been able to travel to China. I was going every year until the COVID pandemic. And I was starting to make some traction, some connections that were developing toward some, I think, interesting developments of, just more and more opportunities were opening up. And one of the opportunities came at the Central Chinese, what is it called? Their music conservatorium. They have a very large music academy in Beijing, and I was invited there to give a talk on Indian music and mantra, and I don't know how I titled the whole thing. And I came in, and I was introduced to the chief professor of the particular faculty within the school. And before I said a word, he said, "We can send you to all our schools all over China." I hadn't said a thing yet. You don't want to first see if I have anything reasonable to say. No, he was like, "Hey, let's do it." So this, I think, could be a very interesting platform to introduce bhakti. But again, then came the COVID. Another interesting development was in publishing. I've been able to publish 2 books in China, dual language. We do it English and Mandarin, with Yunnan University Press. So it's a respected university press, academic press. And to get a book published in China, you need to go through their censorship system. And the editor in the press who I was working with was very enthusiastic. We're going to get this published. And at the same time he was saying, if we get it through censorship, he said it will be a miracle. In other words, he was saying, I'm not so sure how we're going to do this, because my book was about the Bhagavad-Gita. Again, it's like, don't talk about religion. Okay, Dharma. But somehow we were able, we've done a book called, well, the first part of the book is called The 18 Yogas of the Bhagavad-Gita. As I mentioned, in China, yoga is popular. So I simply did a summary of the Bhagavad-Gita, a very short summary, but focusing on the theme of yoga, taking the traditional titles of each chapter and highlighting how that's presented in the Bhagavad-Gita. So, yeah, some publishing and some lecturing. But it's a huge country, and what's going to happen now? Because they've been becoming more and more tight, and more. It's said that the way China is ruled is with an iron fist in a white glove. And you really feel it like that when you're there. So one has to be careful. Yeah. Why they invite? Yeah. Yes.
You go undercover when you come dressed as a Swami.
I don't dress like this. No.
But do they know that you are a Swami in a religious tradition or in a spiritual tradition?
Generally not, no. No, we don't volunteer. But of course now with everything all over the internet, it's very easy for them to see. They can see the connection I have, my civil name, but it connects pretty quickly to my Swami name. So yeah, sometimes I wonder how long I'll be able to go. We'll see. But one thing that we've done is that with each time that I would give a presentation, I try to get a letter of thanks from that faculty, with a signature and a stamp. And so I have a collection of those. And then if there's some question later, well, this is what I do. That can possibly help. All right. Yes. Question. Comment. You can stand up if you like.
I think we mentioned the four aims of life, one being the attainment of the existential freedom. Can you just explain a little on that?
Yes, existential freedom. Yes, thank you. Nice question. I think I had the Sanskrit word there, moksha, liberation, and this is generally understood as a sort of final solution to what we typically just call material existence, where, again, a Sanskrit term may be used, samsara. And samsara can be taken as meaning the cycle of repeated death and rebirth, where it's understood, and this is kind of a basic point of Bhagavad-Gita, that when this life is over, we move on from this body to another body. What sort of body that is, and where that body will be, and so on, will be very much determined by our consciousness in this life. And therefore, a strong impetus for bhakti, for practicing yoga, is a preparation of our consciousness so that instead of getting yet another material body, instead of getting another material body, which is bound to be a source of endless suffering, even if there is a bit of happiness in between, we can get a non-material, an atemporal body, a body with incredibly wonderful senses that can be thoroughly absorbed in the wonderful, unlimited, blissful, expanding, blissful sensations of service to the supreme Lord of the senses, Krishna or Krishna. That's in a nutshell. But there are different ideas in Indian traditions about what this existential freedom looks like or what it is. So what I gave you was our understanding from the Krishna tradition. Is that okay? Good.
It's
Yes.
a Marxistic quote, freedom of labor. I don't get it.
Yeah, Marx had this concern, which was a legitimate concern. When was he writing? It was in the 19th century. The so-called Industrial Revolution was going on. He was in England. I don't know if this is true, but it's said that he said that as he would sit in the British Library in London doing his research, he had boils on his rear end, and he would suffer greatly sitting and he would say, "The world is going to suffer for my bodily troubles," something like that. Anyway, so he was concerned that the factory workers in Manchester in the UK were working long hours and getting paid pittance. They were hardly getting paid anything for it. Very minimal wages, and they were living more or less subhuman lives. He was concerned, how is this, this cannot go on like this. And therefore, in his logic of what needed to be done was the laboring class needed to say, no, we're not going to do this. We need to revolt. And so came the idea of how society changes by class conflict and by revolution. And so he spoke about this labor, reducing labor. It'll be great. People get more time, then they can be more, that's a good thing, because people will then become more creative. And Hannah Arendt said, have a look around. I remember when I was a kid, we used to hear about how bright the future is going to be when there's going to be so much leisure time. Lots and lots and lots and lots of leisure time. And then they were worried about it. The sociologists, what are we going to do with all that free time? At that time, as I was growing up, the families in my neighborhood, most of the women were at home taking care of the children, and the men were off at their jobs. Well, it seems like that's changed, and instead of there being more time, there's less time, and there's more work, and instead of one member of the family working, there are two members of the family working, the father and the mother, and the kids are being sent to school. I mean, this, I still can't can't process, but I'm hearing this repeatedly now, that it's now standard that children are taken to school at age 2. Is that also here in Switzerland? Not yet. Well, in, where did I see this? In Croatia and in Hong Kong. High competition, they told me there's high competition among parents to get their 2-year-olds in the best kindergarten. Well, kindergarten, yeah, but at age 2? So why is that? It's because, get them in school and we can go to work. Isn't it? Something like that is happening. Maybe it hasn't happened yet here in Switzerland. It's happening. Yeah.
4, I guess.
4.
But with 6 months you can bring your kid to the garden.
3 months.
3 months.
3 months you could make. Yeah. So this is, as Prabhupada would say, this is advancement of civilization.
But Marx had a lot of labor also. The co-causes, no? Marx had a lot of labor also for his.
Labor would always be there for him, but if it would be done in a just way, then it would be more properly distributed. And this is something that a transcendentalist, I think, could agree with. We want fairness. People don't, not that some people should work hard for the others. Let there be some balance in society so that there can be community. Okay, so I think on that happy note we can end, and I'll say thank you all so much for your kind and patient attention. I hope I said something that you can take with you today. I wish you a wonderful week. Hare Krishna, Shri Prabhupada ki Jai.
Krishna Kshetra Thank you very much, Maharaj, for your whole presentation. Just 1 second. Maharaj will be with us for the week till next Sunday. So there's other opportunities to listen from Maharaj. Wednesday morning, Maharaj will give a Bhagavatam lecture in the morning at 7:30. And on Thursday and Friday evening, we have a program here in the temple from 7 o'clock on. On Thursday, Maharaj will speak on a book that he's writing at the moment, which is Yoga and the Animal Ethics. Is that right? Yes? So that will be a presentation on Thursday evening. And on Friday evening is simply question and answer session. Because maybe some of you would have more questions. So you can come back on Friday. And
stop at this moment.
and then Friday evening we get a chance to just ask any questions we have. And Maharaj will be there giving his time and his experience, sharing his realization on any topic you like to hear from. That's on Friday evening at 7 o'clock. And then next Sunday there will be, Maharaj gives another talk during the Tamil program, which is at 12:45, another lecture. So please feel free to come and join the programs. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.